So nice to be here. Nice to see all you. My name is Kaig Lightner. I'm the founding executive director of Portland Community Football Club, a club in Portland, Oregon that is specifically dedicated to ensuring that kids from marginalized communities, including LGBTQ communities, are getting access to playing competitive soccer. So we are a competitive club playing in that big pay-to-play space and really trying to disrupt it and trying to do things differently. You can look us up, PCFC Soccer, on the Instagrams and the Twitters and all that. But since I've got a short period of time here, I really wanted to jump in this conversation around gender diversity, not to get into the nitty gritty of how do we, do nuts and bolts, but really more of a kind of thought bubble, kind of a conversation around these concepts around gender, these concepts around inclusion, and what's important to know about my background that you may not know from just looking at me is that I am a trans person. I am a queer person. That means that I grew up playing soccer, playing lots of other sports as a girl, being on the girls' teams. I was assigned the sex of female at birth. And so I found myself, like probably a lot of you did on this group, being told how girls do and do not play. And so I found simultaneously within sport a place of belonging where I could find myself and really kind of like put aside gender and just be an athlete and find that identity. And then also at the same time feel excluded because I was being told you're too aggressive, you play too much like a boy, you're cocky, you're arrogant. All of these labels that those of us who are female socialized get put onto us unfairly and without justification and without need. And so I could feel that belonging and that exclusion almost at the same time. And then I also felt it similarly in coaching. I got into coaching soccer when I was 15. Similar sense of belonging. I suddenly found this place where I was like, this is my thing. This is what I love to do. I love to be that mentor to kids, to be that guide for kids learning so many great things through the sport. And then also found myself feeling excluded because I was somebody who didn't look the part of a female coach, right? I didn't look like this. I didn't have hair on my face. I didn't have a low voice. I had short hair. I looked like a genderqueer person in the world of coaching. And so I also found myself excluded in a lot of ways. And one particular way that I wanted to share with all of you, because I think it's relevant to this conversation of trying to create more gender inclusive spaces, is a little bit of a story. I was 27. I was just kind of entering myself into the world of competitive club coaching here in Portland. And I had become good friends with some coaches and we'd been co-coaching together and just felt a lot of trust and camaraderie and felt a lot of belonging with that coaching group, particularly with one woman that I was coaching. And I was at the place in my life where I was still using my birth given name of Kate, and my pronouns were she and her at the time while I was coaching soccer. And then while I was out in my social world, I was Kaig and using he and him pronouns. So as you can imagine, that's pretty tough. That's got a lot of dysphoria that gets baked into that experience. And so I was trying to start figuring out, could I transition within the world of soccer and in the world of youth coaching? I felt pretty unsure about it, but I thought, well, I'll go to my friend who I'm coaching with and let her know that I'm thinking about changing my name to Kaig and changing my pronouns. And so I came to her one day on the field and said, hey, I think I'm going to go by Kaig now. And she just looked at me and laughed directly to my face and said, that's a ridiculous name. Why would I call you that? I honestly don't remember what I replied to her. It's all a bit of a blur. But what I do remember is the feeling of, well, I don't belong here. This isn't my place, clearly. I don't feel safe. I don't feel like this is a place where I can express my full self. I'm not expressing my full self as it is by going by a name that's not really mine and pronouns that don't really belong to me. And so I left. I quit that club. I quit the profession of coaching for a couple of years. I finally came back to it. But what I think is important to focus on in that story and in this experiences that I have been having as a trans person is that this isn't just about creating gender diversity and inclusion for trans people. That is super important and needs to be done. but it is losing the larger concept of creating diversity and inclusion for people of all genders if we just get siloed into how do we create inclusion for just this one population of people. If we start to really expand the thinking and expand the ideas around inclusion around gender, and start to include people of all gender identities, non-binary gender identities, cisgender identities who don't fit into the binary, right? If we really start to push those boundaries, then we are going to be able to create far more opportunities, far more places of safety, and really push back against this really rigid binary system that is baked into our culture, but is really baked into sports at the forefront. It is like very, very much inside and at the foundation of our sports industry. And so what I am doing currently with PCFC and with my work as an independent consultant is I'm really trying to push the envelope of, can we take a quantum leap from gender equality? That is presupposing that there's only two genders, that there's only two acceptable genders, and we're trying to make them equal. We need to move away from that. I think we're starting to, but make the quantum leap from gender equality to gender equity, where we recognize that we cannot just give everybody the exact same things because of all the systemic barriers, the gender binary being one of them, and really step into that gender equity space and look at how do all gender identities become valued and understood and elevated to be equal and equitable. But then from there, I think we move into liberation. That's really what I want to push towards in this industry is, can we liberate everybody to feel that anywhere that they play, no matter what their gender identity is, no matter how they present themselves to the world, that they find a place that's safe, welcoming, that they get to express their athletic talents in every way possible, and nobody has any sort of gender notions about it. It's not, oh, you play pretty well for a girl, or any of those notions. Can we eliminate all of those things and liberate all of us? Equality to equity to liberation. And sports liberation is where I'm at. It's what I want to see this industry start to push towards, and to really push that envelope. But it's complex. It's difficult work. It's not as simple as just talking about it. It's got a lot of things behind it. There's a lot of layers to it. And so I just wanted to take a few minutes. I've only got, I think, 10 more minutes to be here with all of you, and just see, what are there things that you're doing in your space as somebody who's working in the soccer industry, who's leading in the soccer industry? Are there norms that you're pushing back against? Are there questions that you're asking as a leader to try and push open these doors and really push back against the gender binary? Or are you just listening and learning? Are you somebody who's just at the beginning of understanding how oppressive the gender binary system is on all of us, and you're starting to just really open your eyes and learn?
Conversation came up recently regarding a league in the New York City area. I had mentioned this earlier. They're trying a new model where most what are considered co-ed adult recreational leagues are first of all, they're called co-ed.
Yeah.
Should they be called mixed gender leagues? Is what that is
Yeah.
a question they're contemplating. That's like one facet of something I'm experiencing, and I'm being asked actually as well. And then two, another thing is they flipped what is called like the max and the minimum. So typically you have to have a minimum of two female identifying or non-male or gender non-conforming players on the field, since there's seemingly this like shortage of access to these types of players. So this is just one lens from the kind of adult rec soccer league, which I do think plays a pretty significant role, because a lot of these individuals are then coaches or have some sort of other connection and normative view on the game, whether they're going to the bar later to go watch the men's game and not the women's game. So what type of is there any advice you might have for them? Because they're striving to they flipped it from the two minimum of inclusive gender to have it be a maximum of two men on the field. So in a 77 league. So yeah, any thoughts you might have there?
First, I'll just say to the language around co-ed, you can use things like mixed gender or gender inclusive teams. We have all gender inclusive teams at PCFC. So all of our teams from 5-year-olds up to 18-year-olds are for everybody to play together. That's a really different model in the youth soccer landscape, and usually really freaks people out. We're doing fine. We are open to having gender specific teams as we bring more players in, but we wanted to fill rosters. And so we decided to fill rosters based on athletic talent, skill, where kids are at. And I think that's can be a similar model for particularly for adult teams. I think adult teams can really open up the space for everybody to play together and really base it on, are you at the appropriate playing level? Are you a cisgender woman who is a badass and can just hold on to every, go up against anybody, then you're at the right playing level. If you're a cisgender man and you're just learning the game and you're playing against these high level people, you're not at the right playing level. Doesn't matter what your gender is, doesn't matter what sex you were assigned at birth. It's about, can you play the game at the level that's appropriate for you and safe for you, children or adults? And so I think that's where this issue really gets so sticky and so controversial, is that we are only focusing on the idea of bodies and who can do what based on the expectations around gender, instead of focusing on what is your athletic skill, what is your talent, what is your physique, what are all these other aspects that make up all of us as individual athletes. Why are we not looking at that first, making decisions based off of that, and then having a discussion around what's the best place for each athlete to play? That gets way more complicated when we start talking about professionals and Olympic level athletes. I get that. I'm not trying to ignore science or say that there isn't a difference between estrogen bodied people and testosterone bodied people. I've experienced it. I've watched myself grow into this different looking human because of testosterone, and my strength has changed and all those things. But we as a society, are just boiling it down to these just basic things where we're trying to say one size fits all kind of solutions to gender inclusion. And it's just not that simple. We have to look at athletes as individual people, especially at the youth age. We can allow a lot more space for kids to just play, just be a kid and get in there and play. And what's so fascinating to me about it is that I am watching in real time within this club that I run, girls and boys playing together and learning so much about unlearning. They are unlearning the societal messages of girls aren't strong enough, girls aren't allowed to play here. All of those messages, the girls and the boys are unlearning that. And boys specifically are getting their eyes open to, these girls that I'm playing with, they will kick my butt if I do not continue to train hard. And that's for real. Those are the things we want to teach kids. Those are the spaces we want to create for those kids. Those are the spaces we want to create for adults within the playing industry, within the coaching industry, within the world of sports, and particularly in soccer. But it takes courage. You've got to push back. You've got to ask questions, and you've got to say, this is the way it was done. Can we do it differently?
Thanks, Gage. A couple things came into the general chat. One was a commentary from Alexa about new women's pro league whistle, saying, we have established cultural requirements for all teams and have these topics folded into the fabric of what we do. All coaches will be required to take the coach education course coming out from Athlete Ally. That was a commentary that came in. But there was a question that came in next. If you want to comment on the commentary, or if you want me to continue on.
This is great. I need to look at the most recent thing coming out of Athlete Ally. I haven't been able to keep up. So I'm curious about all the things. I mean, they're at the top of the game for that kind of stuff. So I'm glad to hear that's being baked in. That's a really important part. It's got to be baked in to the fabric of every facet. So that's great. Thanks, Alexa.
From Brittany Cummins, for a couple of the women's leagues in New York City, we're working on balancing the USSF, United Soccer federation rules, which should potentially change, but short of that occurring. We want to make sure that we are not only inclusive of trans players, but also ensure that the process does not feel invasive. Any thoughts on how we can thoughtfully ask the right questions and or build a proper private process for the registration so that trans players for amateur leagues governed by USSF rules, which call for documentation?
I think the fact that you're asking what are the questions we should be asking is actually the first step, just to be recognizing that there are questions to ask. The hard part about this is that we're kind of in a tiered solution here, Brittany. It's that they're going to, at this point in the stage of US soccer, they're going to ask for documentation because they think that's what's protecting access in some way, and you know, all these other presupposed ideas. And so it's kind of like, so they're gatekeepers, right? So trans people are once again having to adhere to the gatekeepers of who is saying is they can appropriately play or not play. And so that's just work to be done, right? That's just pushing the envelope to say, what is this documentation really about? But that's a longer term problem to solve for, that's very complex, that's very political, that has a lot of layers to it. And in the short term, we're trying to get players access. So it's a little bit of that balance of, okay, let's say, yes, okay, gatekeepers, you're saying you need to provide documentation. What kind of documentation? Can we make it as least invasive as possible? Can we have conversations with athletes? Can we humanize this process in a way that maybe isn't the best ultimate solution, but at least behaves in a way of saying, these are real people? That was mentioned in the last panel. It's important to recognize that we're real people. We trans folks didn't just drop out of the sky. We've been here all along. We're going to be here all along. And there's going to be many, many more people who want to gain access to this sport without being put under the microscope. So can we at least humanize it, bring it back to the center of human heart experience, that you are a human, you are wanting to play the sport that you love, and let's work together and not have it be such an ostracizing, othering experience that ultimately keeps people out, which is, I think, by design. There's a lot of by design aspects to the larger federation and discussions in there that I think they don't really understand what it means to open it up and are afraid of what it means. And so you put more layers in, you put more barriers in, that keeps it easier to keep people out. It's our job to push back. And that's what I'm here for. I will be talking as loud and as openly as I can as a trans person. Of how can we support this progress? Follow PCFC, because we are about to launch a Liberate Sports pledge this year that is going to ask for people to sign on and be a part of this movement. We've been doing this thing for 10 years. We're ready to make a movement. We'd love to have all of you join us. So follow us. You'll get all the news soon.